So this is a very ancient farm. The Romshed is an Anglo-Saxon word for the meaning gathering of water, and we're at the bottom of the hill, so it's very watery. And if you look across the fields here, we've got a map of 1655 of the farm, and the field boundaries are almost exactly the same now as they were then. This landscape has been shaped by livestock grazing across it for all of those centuries. And if we hadn't got the livestock, we'd have a completely different landscape here now. We wouldn't see the views going out there because it would all be scrub and trees. We own 200 acres and we farm about a further 50 on a seasonal basis. We've got our suckler herd of around about 20 cattle, and we keep all of the animal stuff finishing. So we've got about 60 cattle on the farm because you keep the youngsters around until they're 2.5. We've got a flock of 150 ewes, so we have roughly 250 lambs every year. Again, we take them all through to finishing. We've got chickens, we have eggs. Because of the environment, we actually started off immediately farming on very strong conservation ground. So we've always been very aware of the wildlife on the farm and wanted to do what we can to maximise that. There's so many ways in which we can be the solution to climate change and global warming. I just think that regenerative agriculture has to be the way forward. You completely reduce your input, so you don't put fertilisers on. One of the other things I'm excited about with this new regularly moving our stock, and maybe every day, is that there's no time for a build-up of disease at all. Well, it's such a basic lesson that if you have that much grass trying to grow again, there's a tiny amount for photosynthesis, but if you can leave that much grass, there's a really good amount for photosynthesis, and the grass, the energy can come from the sun, allowing the roots to continue to grow deep underneath. And that's the way we should be thinking. We need to change the whole mindset of all farmers, all livestock producers across the country. We don't ever put nitrogen on our farm, partly because we're organic, but also we're pasture fed. So we've got legumes fixing the nitrogen naturally into the soil. In the summer you can see the trefoils and vetches, which are also nitrogen fixing, provide pollination opportunities for insects and bees, and are brilliant for the livestock as well to eat a really varied, healthy diet. So our cattle and sheep are incredibly healthy, just grazing the grass. They don't need anything else. If this field was constantly ploughed to, say, produce vegetables or cereals, it wouldn't have any of this structure at all. There'd be huge loss of carbon every time it's ploughed. This permanent pasture is really what we need to be nurturing. Even though it's really wet and it's basic clay, is nice and crumbly, and that's caused by all of the mycorrhizal and other activity that you can't see with the naked eye. The key to this daily moves is it means the land is rested for a long time behind the back of it. And I've noticed just for the 1.5 to 2 years that we've been doing it on this farm, how quickly the fields recover. After 4 days, a piece of grass will try to grow. And so you're allowing the grass to grow back up again. You're also, in fact, in our case, resting the hedges. We've got beautiful hedges on this farm. And instead of being nibbled constantly, the cows love browsing them. Just for 1 day they browse that section, then you put the back fence up and they move on to the next one. If you can farm in order to have permanent deep rooting plants, you're holding a huge amount of carbon in there, and the whole process of grass growing quickly, being eaten and then growing again is actually taking it out of the atmosphere. The other thing I think that's so mad at the moment is feeding cereals to particularly cattle, which are ruminants. They don't need cereals. They can rely entirely on grass. They're the only animals, cattle and sheep, which are ruminant animals, which are able to eat grass and convert that into protein. Now, the UN's produced a report which says that if we stopped feeding cereals to all animals, we could feed the world with its growing population in 2050, 9 billion people, using organic farming methods. But that one proviso is that we need to stop feeding cereals to animals. The weather is changing. I mean, we're getting long periods of dry weather and then long periods of really wet weather. The temperatures are generally higher. And I would feel that, again, by farming, getting deeper rooting plants, you're making yourself much more resilient to those climate changes because the roots are going down to the moisture lower levels. They're not drying out so quickly in the hot sun. But having deep rooting plants, the water's held in the soil for a long period of time, so the flooding's less. So it's part of the whole sort of ecosystem services. meat is part of a sustainable diet, and if only people could realise it's not just part of a sustainable diet, but it's actually part of managing the planet in a very sustainable way. With 60% of the UK is covered in grasslands. If we're not going to graze that with cattle and produce protein for humans to eat, what are we going to do with it? It's the natural thing to do. And I think we have to get our whole food systems back to being local. So if you live in the area around here, you should be eating beef and meat off the local land. Maybe in much less quantities than we are at the moment, but that's the way we have to go.